Mary, there's a little note in the chat for you from someone.
Oh, okay. What's this? Okay. And good morning, everyone. My name is Mary Annis. Most of you probably know me, and maybe there are some who don't. I'm the outreach coordinator for SeniorsNL. I want to welcome everyone to this week's Let's Talk About. And today we're going to be talking about something that's of importance to many of us now, and definitely will be important to more of us in the future. And that is family and friends as caregivers. And I'll speak briefly to that in a moment. Before I introduce today's speaker, however, I'd like to cover a few brief household items with you. Please mute your mics to block out background noises. There's captioning at the bottom of the screen if you want to turn that on. And any questions or comments you have, we'd be really appreciative if you put them in the chat box for now, and they will be answered at the end of the session. And hopefully we'll have time then to open the floor for other questions. This session is being recorded, as you all know. And one other note, I would love it if you start sending in some requests for presentations, because we're trying to do these based on what people want from us, okay? So all topics welcome, and we'll get going. We're going to take a few minutes now to acknowledge the land that we live on, and I'll ask Barb to read that acknowledgement.
We respectfully acknowledge the land on which we gather as the ancestral homelands of the Beothuk, whose culture has now been erased forever. We also acknowledge the island of Ukta-Humbuk as the unceded traditional territory of the Beothuk and the Mi'kmaq. And we acknowledge Labrador as the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Innu of Nitassinan, and the Inuit of Nunatsiavut, and the Inuit of Nunatuavut. We recognize all First Peoples who were here before us, those who live with us now, and the 7 generations to come. As First Peoples have done since time immemorial, we strive to be responsible stewards of the land and to respect the cultures, ceremonies, and traditions of all who call it home. As we open our hearts and minds to the past, we commit ourselves to working in the spirit of truth and reconciliation to make a better future for all.
Thanks, Barb. It's often scary, you know, or a bit disconcerting to think about providing care for someone who is ill, someone who may have dementia, or someone with a disability that prevents them for doing some things for themselves. The person caregiving can have its downside, okay? The person you're caring for may become resentful or depressed about being ill and depending on you for the things that they used to do themselves. As a caregiver, you may have to put your life on hold and forget your own interests and outings just to make sure that you're there for the person who needs you. Watching someone you know go through failing health can also bring sadness to you. It can probably lead to depression even. It can be mentally exhausting as well as physically demanding. But we have to remember that caregiving can also be a very rewarding experience. It can give back to someone, it's an opportunity to give back to someone who has been there for you over the years. It can offer some alone time to share memories that you made together, helping you to develop a better understanding of what life might be like for you in a while. and knowing that your loved one is being well cared for and can stay at home instead of having to move into a nursing home. Like everything, caregiving has its ups and downs. It helps if, as caregivers, you could talk about those ups and downs with others who have experienced them. Talk with people who've been there and find out how they made time to take a break and keep themselves healthy. We asked registrants during when they were registering to let us know two things. And we received 52 responses to those questions. And of those 52, this is someone unmuted there.
I don't see you because
Okay. Yes, of the 52 responses we received, only 15 said no, they have not been a caregiver. So that leaves a lot of people, 37 people, who said yes, they have provided care or they are providing care for a family member or friend. So obviously the very high percentage of us are going to be, if we haven't already, provided care for someone. The second question we asked registrants was, do you expect to be a caregiver for a family member or a friend at some future time? Again, we had 52 responses, only 2 of which do not expect to be a caregiver. Okay, now maybe they've already provided care for the people who've gone before them, or maybe they don't feel that they're able to provide care if they should be called on to do so. Of the remaining 50 respondents, 19 said they don't know if they will be providing care. And because you don't know, you can't tell in advance if someone's going to get ill, become ill to the point that they do need someone to provide care for them. But the remaining 31 people said yes, they definitely do think that they're going to be providing care for someone. I'm pleased now to present today's speaker. And here is Meg Vis. And Meg was born in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, has a degree in agriculture, specifically animal science. Meg loves all things nature. She loves food, dogs, and pigs. Now, I don't know the story behind the pigs, but I'm going to have to ask her when we finish here. Her career has been focused on marketing, and she moved to Newfoundland and Labrador in 1995, quickly finding her heart home. I mean, so many people just love us when they get here that they don't want to leave ever. Meg is one of them. While she was living here, her mother, who lived in Ontario, was diagnosed with Alzheimer's at the age of 65. Her father chose to be her mother's caregiver until he couldn't do it any longer. And that was for 10 of the 14 years that her mom was needing care. Meg's siblings were physically much closer, but emotionally less able to deal with their mother's illness and to support their father's efforts. For 14 years, Meg became secondary caregiver to her mother and primary caregiver to her father. Meg acknowledges that it was difficult, frustrating, and expensive in both financial and personal time. She had all this travel to do back and forth, and she felt like she'd studied for a master's in caregiving, relationships, medicine, pharmaceuticals, and home support. Most importantly, though, Meg found the whole experience to be beautiful and rewarding as well. She learned that she had a passion for older people. She loves their perseverance, their reverence, stubbornness, and fierceness, their courage and grace. And there's a lot of older people are like that. Maybe all of us are. Would be nice. And Meg also learned to never underestimate older people. Whenever and however she can, it is her desire to help take the edge off their challenges so they can focus on living and continuing to give. And Meg is always ready to share her caregiving knowledge and volunteers on the information and referral line here at SeniorsNL on Wednesday afternoons. Meg, as many of you know, I was off work on medical leave for a number of months there. Meg stepped up to the plate and took over a lot of what I was doing before I left. And so Meg also continues to support me, and which is fabulous. Thanks, Meg. Now I'm going to ask Meg to put up her presentation, and she can take over.
Thank you, Mary. Okay, I'm gonna just make this big. And there you go. All good?
Okay.
Okay, all good? Oh, somebody's got a mic open. Okay. Can everybody hear me okay? I'm gonna assume everybody can hear me okay.
Yes.
Mary, thank you. When I saw that bio, I was like, oh, right, that was one of the things I wanted to do while you were away, was change my bio, but I never got to it. Thank you for finding that one. So today we're here to talk about family and friends as caregivers. And I would like to minimize something here, if I may. There we go. So being a caregiver, as Mary mentioned, for family and or friends can be a very rewarding experience. You will also likely experience feelings of frustration, have also exhaustion and more. Whoops, holy moly. That just popped right to the very end. Bear with me, people. I have no idea how that happened. Thank you. Back to the beginning. Sorry, guys. I have no idea how that popped out. Slideshow from the beginning. Okay. Today we're going to explore the opportunities and challenges of being a family or friend caregiver and some of the resources that will support these efforts. But I'd like to start with a definition of caregiver. Specifically those who care for and improve the quality of life of the most vulnerable in our society. Family and friend caregivers, there's other names for that are used more universally than family or friend caregiver. An informal caregiver is often a term that you may hear. An unpaid caregiver is another term that you may hear. And essential caregiver has been used, but I think thanks to COVID, it's being used more often. And I think we need to thank COVID for that, because that is the very truth of this, is that you are an essential caregiver when you're giving of everything that you are in order to care for someone else. So I'd like to start with a little bit of information. Stats Canada in 2018 did a study on caregivers in Canada. So there's just a few screens on this. So caregivers in Canada, and this is on family caregivers, are becoming increasingly recognized as an important role in society, and not just because of the role that we play, but also because it reduces the social costs that are associated with health services and institutionalization, and care recipients benefit when they're able to remain at home and maintain a positive quality of life. "25% of Canadians provide care to a family member or a friend. That's 1 in 4. More than 50% of caregivers have reported, and this is, remember, like 4-year-old data, 50% of caregivers reported that they provide care primarily for the older generations. And aging populations are putting increased pressure across the country on these numbers, but more particularly in Newfoundland and Labrador. where today 73% of Newfoundland's population is 50 plus. And as a province, we are aging 4 times faster than any province in Canada. And the reality is that the more time you spend on caregiving, the less time there is left for family, for self-care, and for social activities. Persons who provide 20 or more hours of caregiving a week, and that is not unusual, are more likely to report that caregiving responsibilities are very stressful or stressful. And most caregivers find, as Mary mentioned, their caregiving experience rewarding. I can speak to that personally. A sense of giving back to a loved one for sure, and an increased sense of competence and purpose in life. And if there's one thing that I have learned in the last 10 years of my life, and directly from seniors, is that a purpose in life is almost like lifeblood. The more engaged the caregiver is, the greater the feeling of reward. Now, none of this is probably going to be a surprise to you, but it's also why it's one of the more difficult things to nail down when it comes to family caregivers, is because every single person who is giving care and the people who are receiving the care have their own unique story and relationship. And we come from everywhere. Family caregivers are in rural markets and urban markets. They have different spiritual and religious beliefs. They have a variety of income levels, from the richest to the poorest. Some are working while they're doing it. Some are raising children. Some are retired. Some are literally at home with their children and their parents at the same time and carrying a job. A variety of ethnic backgrounds, a variety of ages and health. There are people who have their own health issues who are caregiving for someone who maybe has more health issues. So that's some of the variety. And since there's over 70% who are on this call or on the Zoom who have experience as a family caregiver, you're going to recognize all of this and probably more. And at the end, if you want to share something that's not here that you've had to do, then certainly let us know. We play many roles as family caregivers, advocating on behalf of our loved one, advocating within different settings such as hospitals, long-term care homes, etc., advocating with family doctors, advocating for a specific disease process. The planning of the care, for some people, is probably more than others, depending on your personality and how you do that. But the reality is that there's a significant amount of effort that goes into planning for the care of the loved one on a broad scale and also on a daily and hourly basis. There will always be financial and legal affairs that are a part of this effort, and in fact protect people within the context of this role. No doubt, obviously, the emotional and social support. To some extent, maybe everybody is just involved in the living of life, housework, meal prep, etc. The personal care to some degree or another. I know that that's something for me that went from not as important to a very large part of my effort with my parents. Planning respite. And if this isn't something that you are doing, I hope that you will after this presentation, because the respite is for both of you. The respite is a break from a 24/7 sometimes relationship with someone where both of you would benefit from that, particularly the caregiver who needs to plan for respite so that you can recharge your batteries. Finding services and programs. And I hope you think of SeniorsNL when you're looking for that. Transportation, you are not only the driver, but you are also the advocate at the appointments as well. Keeping the notes, making sure that there's follow-up on that. Coordinating moves. Did you know that on average, from the age of 65 on, you have 3 more moves to make in your life? Moving is one of the things I despise the most in my life. So to know that I have at least 3 more ahead of me, I'm not looking forward to that. The managing of medications, from a personal experience, that was one of the toughest. Look forward to maybe discussing that more with people. And we do it everywhere. You do it in your home. You do it in the caregiver's home. You do it in a retirement residence, in a personal care home, in a nursing home, on the assisted living floor of a retirement residence, in the hospital, because they're very busy and they may not be doing it the way you want it to be done or the way your loved one expects it. It may be next door and you're running over and giving a hand. And now, increasingly, we're doing it long distance. So the growing reality of increased migration in Newfoundland and Labrador means that there's a rapidly aging population in Newfoundland and the loved ones are away, and they could be in another province, they could be in another country, and they might just be at the other end of the, or in another country, somewhere in Canada. So for me, this is one where it was a learning curve from start to end. There are unique challenges that are, so take caregiving like you're doing it now, and now put yourself in Toronto and your loved one is here. And imagine how you accomplish all of those roles with those challenges. So of course there's travel. Imagine in COVID, all of those people who are doing this in COVID who couldn't travel and had to find other ways in order for their loved one to be cared for. Communications. The truth is that, you know, I may prefer to text, but my father could barely manage the television remote. So that was always an interesting situation. Planning takes on a whole new level when you're doing this from a long distance, and you're talking about days and not hours for even planning one item. The parts that I found the most challenging were appointments, deciding when was I going to go in, because I couldn't always be there. So when was the most important time for me to be there? Managing resources, because I was the one who had to manage the resources. And yes, I could engage some brothers or sisters, but for whatever reason, they were really not engaged. Again, not uncommon, and one of the things that you have to live with. And for me, the most important thing, one of the most important things from a health perspective for long distance care is creating and managing medical relationships. My father, for example, had a file 4 inches thick. He had 5 specialists and a pharmacist. And so I made a point when I was in every time to grow those relationships. So they would call me, that I didn't have to try and find them. They would call me when there was something on the go, but that took a lot of time and a lot of smiling. Not to mention the time and the costs that are associated with long distance. We are getting more and more calls here at SeniorsNL from family members who live away, who have loved ones here, who are concerned for them and are calling us for resources in ways that, and doing what a caregiver does, trying to figure out what they need and how to get it done. And not all relationships are the same between a caregiver and a care receiver. Some are short-term and some are pretty long-term. Some are maybe very caring and loving, and some are a little more complicated. And the caregiver, the care receiver may be able to communicate and is involved in their care. And then there are cases where the caregiver cannot communicate their needs. So again, nothing but differences and ways of thinking about how you're going to manage some of those things. And Mary touched on this too. Our motivations differ. Maybe I made a promise when I was 17 that I would be there. Maybe I'm doing it because I love them. Maybe it's for financial motivations. There are people who are doing this for financial motivations. Maybe it's because a culture or a tradition makes it important that I do that. Maybe it's because I want to stay together with my loved one. I've been through that one. Maybe it's an obligation that I feel, and maybe there's just nobody else. It doesn't really matter, because whatever the reasons are, we still do it. The one thing that we all share are similar feelings, because there's the one thing I can tell you from personal experience is there's no single feeling that you feel when you are a caregiver. You feel them all, and sometimes you feel them all at the same time. So I feel love. I feel guilt. I'm afraid. I'm way overwhelmed. I'm frustrated. I am really satisfied that I learned that, and I got that guy to call me. That's so great. Oh my God, I'm so tired. I don't know what to do with myself. I'm weeping for no reason at all times of the day. I can no longer feel compassion for your illness because I'm just so tired. But I'm so ultimately grateful for being able to do this, that I could be burnt out as well. And burning out is probably one of the worst things that can happen to a caregiver. So burnout is a state of physical, mental, and emotional exhaustion. You are trying to do more than you have the time for, the money, or the energy to be able to manage. You are neglecting your own emotional, physical, and spiritual health. And the reality is that dementia, such as Alzheimer's disease and other dementia or mental health related conditions, are more stressful on caregivers than dealing with just physical ailments. And the reality is that clinical depression can affect anywhere from 20 to 40% of caregivers. And when you're dealing with clinical depression, you need to deal with the clinical depression. There's a bunch of warning signs that can show up. And so this is a long list, just sharing the long list with you. Are you feeling a bit irritable? Are you prone to anger? And that maybe wasn't how you normally operate. Are you feeling exhausted? Do you feel pulled in too many directions? Do you find yourself perhaps withdrawing a bit from your life? Are there changes in your appetite and your weight because maybe you're not eating properly, or maybe you're not eating the right things? Is there change in your sleep patterns? Are you waking up at 3:30 in the morning thinking about things that you wouldn't normally do? Are you getting sick a little more often? Do you have feelings of helplessness or hopelessness? Feelings of wanting to hurt yourself or perhaps the person whom you are caring for? Are you self-medicating to get through some of this? It could be alcohol, could be medications, might be sleeping pills, might be telling myself I'm just doing it until I get through, the next 2 weeks. Am I feeling stressed in the presence of my loved one? Am I having difficulty concentrating? Do I feel like my mind's in a fog? Am I missing appointments? Hang on. Here's the thing about burnout. It's really important that you are proactive. So if you are feeling a large number of those, and you know if you're burning out or not, truthfully, and you may tell yourself, I have no choice because I have to do all of this. But the truth is that you must make a choice, and you need to be proactive, and you need to find some respite and some time and some space and some help in order to deal with it. So if you recognize these warning signs, it will only get worse if you ignore them and if you keep them to yourself. You have to take some steps to get your life back into some form of balance. And at some point, you really need to communicate your feelings, not maybe just to a family member, but maybe also a doctor or someone else that you trust. Because here is the truth. If you are the caregiver, and most of us have flown, and the airbag drops, they tell them to put them on you first, you the caregiver, not the care receiver. And that's because if you can't do it, they're not going to survive. It's not selfish, but it's a really, really difficult thing to do. It's almost, for me, it felt counterintuitive. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of the Caregiver Bill of Rights. And it's not an official thing, but it's something that, this one was adapted from an AARP magazine in 1985. So it goes at least that far back, probably further. But I'm going to read it to you because this is something that as a caregiver, perhaps read to yourself once a week to remind yourself that you have the right to take care of yourself. This is not an act of selfishness. It will give me the capability to take better care of my loved ones. I have the right to seek help from others, even though my loved one may object, and they will. I recognize the limits of my own endurance and my strength. I have the right to maintain facets of my own life that do not include the person I care for, just as I would if he or she were healthy. I know that I do everything I reasonably can for this person, and I have the right to do something just for myself. I have the right to get angry, to be depressed, and express other difficult feelings occasionally, to reject any attempt by my loved one, either conscious or unconscious, to manipulate me through guilt, anger, or depression. And that's a tough one. That's a really difficult one. I have the right to receive consideration, affection, forgiveness. That's a biggie, because there's going to be many times in my experience that I needed forgiveness and acceptance for what I do for my loved one. For as long as I offer these qualities in return, I have the right to take pride in what I am accomplishing, to applaud the courage it has sometimes taken to meet the needs of my loved ones. I have the right to protect my individuality, my right to make a life for myself that will sustain me in the time when my loved one no longer needs my full-time help. And I have the right to expect and demand that as new strides are made in finding resources to aid persons living with illness, physical or mental challenges in our country, similar strides will be made towards aiding and supporting caregivers. So now that I've lectured everyone, here's the thing that caregivers need. They need access to information and referral resources. There are a lot of resources out there to help caregivers. Sometimes you don't feel like you have the time to find out. Sometimes you don't know where to go. Certainly, please call SeniorsNL. We do have access to a lot of resources to assist, but there are lots of other places as well, and we can certainly point you in the direction. Sometimes you just need some practical tips and solutions. I call them the tips and tricks of situations. I'll give you one. So my father was in Ontario. I was in Halifax most of that time. And he had the remote control for the TV. Every night I got a phone call because he pressed some button that did not allow him to watch the show that he wanted to watch. And what on earth can I do about that? I can't see it. I don't know what he pressed. He can't communicate to me what he pressed. All he knows is he can't see the show that he wants to see. Here's a practical tip. Next time I went up to the cottage where he was living at the time, I grabbed some duct tape and I duct taped that remote control so that only 2 buttons could be pressed. And that way he could watch whatever he wanted and he would stop hitting the 43 other buttons that were causing him grief. And I got fewer phone calls and it was great. We also need emotional support. It's a challenge because the reality is that if you talk about grief and bereavement, there's a lot of emotional support out there for people who have or are experiencing grief and bereavement. And the other thing to remember when you're going through caregiving, and particularly with regards to caregiving for someone who has dementia, is that in my experience, you kind of have to deal with 2 deaths, because the first death is the death of someone who doesn't know you anymore. And that is a living passing of you have to deal with that. That is why I know in my family, I had family members who were not able to deal with it and thereby never really dealt with the actual passing of my mother as well. And it made their ability to have a relationship with her while she was going through Alzheimer's very difficult. Unfortunately, in Newfoundland, we don't have a lot of that for caregivers. Largely where we're going to find, let's say, group support, and COVID didn't help, is tied to a disease process. So Alzheimer's might have some support groups, or cancer might have some support groups, but there's not caregiver support groups per se. I hope that changes. And taking time for self-care and quality respite and having access to those resources. And again, that can be challenging. Okay, so here are, I'm gonna hide you guys for a second. So here are some, this is just an overview. It's not comprehensive, but it's to give you some sense of the kinds of information and resources that people want to have access to when they're giving care to a family member or a friend. So for some people, it's just the basics. And it may be, because they can't prepare food for themselves, It may be that they don't have the finances for the food, and where am I going to get food? What about housing? We talked about there being 3 moves in your future after the age of 65. Is the housing adequate for their changing needs? And transportation, are they able to get in and out of a car? Is a bus an option? Do we have to look into the go buses? Community, it's really vital that people, as they age, continue to be a part of community, able to take in activities and events. And it's important to know that if those are accessible, and what's going on. And particularly, is it something that they love? If you're dealing with someone who has dementia or Alzheimer's, music seems to be, certainly for my mom, something that really brought her much joy. And my father, bless his heart, would take her to concerts, even though walking wasn't the best. But if anything ever happened, he relied on everybody else around him to help pick her up and keep on moving. Bless his heart. Elder abuse, it's a thing. It's a very real thing. And here in Newfoundland, we have the Adult Protection Act, which is legislation that protects people who are not aware of the consequences of some of the actions that are going on around them, whether they're doing it to themselves or someone is doing it to them. But that is something that needs to be considered, because if people increasingly experience anger or not taking care of themselves and their own self-care, sometimes something can happen that you never meant to have happen. End of life, we have a new hospice. We have the only hospice in Newfoundland and Labrador now in Grand Falls, Windsor. So perhaps there will be more in the future. And there is palliative care, but I'm going to touch on that again later. Financial benefits, I'm going to cover off a little bit of detail on the paid family caregiver, compassionate care benefits, family caregivers for those, tax credits, legal, enduring powers of attorney, advanced healthcare directives, wills, etc., vital. Medical, patient monitoring programs. So there's diabetes, COPD, etc. There are some of the health regions, and they have varying degrees of this, but they offer patient monitoring programs for COPD, whereby they can put the technology in your home. You get to monitor that from the home with your care, with the person that you're caring for, and or they can do it on their own. And you have a virtual relationship, and you may actually improve your health outcomes as a result of that. And it definitely teaches people how to monitor their own health with some of those disease processes. Geriatric assessment, geriatricians. Now there's a topic. Palliative care. So the reality is that a lot of people here, a lot of people everywhere think of palliative care as an end of life option. It starts out as a medical option. And the reality of palliative care, especially for caregivers, is that it is something to truly consider. Not the least of which for pain management, but also gives you access to like an ambulance, but they come without lights. You have a file in your home. They come in, they can give you oxygen. They can help you set up oxygen. They can give medications to your loved ones. There's no lights, there's no sirens. They can take you into emerge if they have to. But the palliative care or pain management program, which is part of palliative care, can help you long before end of life. Mental health for the caregiver, mental health also for the care receiver. There are a lot of resources here in the mind for that. Respite. There's a shortage largely of respite options, I'm not going to lie. And COVID has taken that away. So St. Luke's for adult daycare, there's a retirement residence that is in the process of opening up another adult daycare, but they have not yet. But overnight stays at retirement residences, at personal care homes, sometimes they and nursing homes, maybe they'll have a bed for respite. It's worth the call. Give us a call to find out and see if we can help you with that. And home care, have others coming to the home to give you a break from that if possible. And last but not least, safety. Falls. The thing about falls when we get older is they can be game changers. And so helping to Prevent falls is really important. OTs can be your best friend, and you can get a doctor to get someone to come into your home and do a look around the home to make sure that it's at maximum safety for preventing falls. Wandering, a very real thing with regards to Alzheimer's, as many of you probably know. Assistive devices. I can't say that one. So I'm going to touch on some of the benefits, the financial benefits. There's a provincial benefit, paid family caregiver. I'm not going into full detail. However, if there's more that you would like to know about this, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. It's handled by the Regional Health Authority, and it's offered through the Community Support Program. And the care receiver must meet the clinical and financial assessment for home care. So if your care receiver has met the assessment for home care, then a family member can be paid to provide that care. The only two people who can't do that are, or one person, is your spouse or your common law partner. Otherwise, others can. There are a couple of federal benefits, compassionate care. Now, this is offered through Service Canada via employment insurance. So you have to obviously have access to employment insurance. It's available to people who have to be away from work temporarily to provide care or support for a family member who is gravely ill with a significant risk of death. And you can receive that for a maximum of 26 weeks. There's also a family caregiver for adults, again through Service Canada and using employment insurance. And you can receive financial assistance benefits to take time away again from work to provide care or support to a critically ill or injured or someone needing end-of-life care person. So I'm not quite sure how they distinguish, but that's a conversation to be had with Service Canada for sure. The weeks of benefits can be shared by eligible caregivers. So you could have two people at the same time or one spelling another one off. And there is also a federal tax credit, the Canada Caregiver credit. So it's a non-refundable tax credit, may be available to you if you support your spouse or your common law partner who has a physical or mental impairment. Also, for one of the more following, or one of the following individuals, I think I need another coffee. So not just for your spouse or common law, but it could be your spouse's or common law's child or grandchild. It could be your spouse's or common law partner's parents, the grandparents, brother, sister, uncle, etc. So this one is a caregiver credit that has more legs on it in terms of who you can apply it to. And if you're working and acting in a caregiving role, perhaps if you haven't, you can always have a conversation with your employer, or maybe it's a union, or go to the human resources department, or perhaps there's an employee representative, and find out if there are any benefits and services that you could avail of. Maybe attached to your healthcare plan, medically related caregiving expenses can be covered. And maybe you just have to negotiate some time off of work, a change in the hours when you come, when you leave. Perhaps you can negotiate paid leave or unpaid leave because you don't want to lose your job. And perhaps there's an employee assistance program that can give you access to some mental health resources that might be helpful. And here's just a few other resources. Most of them are on, all of these ones are online, although there could be ways to reach them by phone and give us a call and we'll happily set you up with that. So McMaster University has a fantastic seniors investment, really. I don't even know what to call it. They're a place to go if you want to learn about all things related to seniors, research, et cetera, et cetera. And they offer a caregiving course. So if that interested anybody, you can check that out. And that's the link for you. This one, carechannel.elise.com, has a robust resource library of resources for caregivers. If anybody is dealing specifically with dementia, which, as mentioned, is even more challenging for caregivers. There's a podcast, multiple podcasts at Dementia Dialogue, and some of these podcasts are people who have dementia, so lived experience, and they're talking about their experience, a little insight into somebody's experience, and also for caregivers as well. And across the country, there are caregiver organizations that have resources that you can access. I did call Ontario because they have virtual group support to find out if it was possible for us from Newfoundland to access that. Unfortunately not, because all of these organizations are receiving provincial funding. So, however, that doesn't prevent you from accessing all the other resources that they have online. BC, Alberta, Ontario, and Nova Scotia. And if anybody knows of any others that they want to share with the group, that would be amazing. And one of the last things I'll talk about, but not the least by any stretch, is that SeniorsNL has created a guide for caregivers. It goes back many years. I believe Mary was the author of this amazing document, large, amazing document. So we are more than happy to share that with you. It covers some of the things that we've talked about, gives some ideas of where to go for some of those. And at the end of it, there's a bunch of worksheets, lists that you can create for contacts, services, programs, lots of charts and worksheets that you can fill out that maybe keep you a little bit organized. And when all else fails, give us a call. We're more than happy to connect you with anything that you might need. Our local number for St. John, 737-2333. We do have toll-free 800-563-5599. I'm pretty sure Trudy probably has dropped that into chat. And you can email us at info@seniorsnl.ca. So that's it, Mary.
Thank you, Meg, very much. And Trudy, thank you very much for all those resources that you've been listed. And they will be sent out, okay? So, and actually, once we send them out and you get them, go through them, if there are any questions you have about any of them, by all means, get in touch with us, because we will give you answers. One way or the other, we'll find an answer for you. There's a few questions that we had here, and we'll start with one that was in the chat box earlier on, Meg, and that was, what is meant exactly by saying aging faster, that we in Newfoundland and Labrador are aging faster than any other province?
I wish I had a chart to show you about that. But think of it as average age. So statistically, every province has an average age, and our average age is higher, 4 times higher than other provinces. There's a lot of reasons for this. We have the highest rate of out-migration of all provinces in Canada. And unfortunately, a lot of our out-migration are taking their baby making skills with them, or what I like to refer to as their uteruses, because once they leave here and they go to Ontario and they have a child, that child is now being recorded as an Ontario resident, not as a Newfoundland resident, and thereby they're not putting downward pressure on the average age of Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. And so there was a time back about 25, 30 years ago where our largest segment was actually in the youngest years, but the youngest baby boomer in Newfoundland and Labrador is 57 years of age. So most of the baby boomers, the elephant is in the snake of the 50 plus years, the 60 plus years to 65 plus years. So the reality is that as we age year by year, we are aging 4 times faster than the rest of Canada. But I think the more interesting statistic and frankly, the more frightening statistic is that 73% of our population is 50 plus. And when you think about family caregivers, 45, 50 is the age where they pretty much start. So that means the seniors are looking after the seniors. if you dare to define yourself as a senior at 50 plus. And by the way, with SeniorsNL, you can self-define.
Okay, we did have one question here. I am interested in finding out exactly what is expected of a caregiver. Now, I know a lot of that was covered. But the question was, am I strong enough mentally and physically to be a caregiver? When someone is evaluating their ability in terms of their mental and physical needs, what would be a good resource for them? Or someone, you know, someone to talk to, maybe their family doctor, I don't know.
Wow.
I imagine it's hard to ascertain going into a caregiving situation just how much of your time and energy it is going to consume.
I think my answer to that question would be that I don't think there's an answer to that question. But what I will say is that you also don't know what you're going into, because every situation is different. So
Yeah.
if you choose to go into that situation because you think you at least want to give it a go, know that every day you're going to learn something new. But if you are wondering if you're going to be able to do that, then before you go into it, set yourself up for success. So make sure that you have access to mental health resources. Make sure that you have set up others to assist. So from a time and energy perspective, make sure that you've got the help that you need in order to get the breaks that you need. Make sure that once a week or whenever you take a check with yourself and say, how am I doing? If you have a good friend, I am very lucky to have a very dear friend who tells me exactly how well or how poorly I'm doing at any moment in my life. I think she takes a lot of pleasure from it. I take a lot of gratitude from that, because I know that she's going to tell me exactly how good or how bad it is and what I need to do. So I don't know that there's an answer for your question, but I do know that there are things that you can do to prepare yourself for that, and also and create as many opportunities to have a support system below you when you know you will feel sad and you will feel happy and you'll have all of these emotions. But when you know that, hit the burnout page, because if there's too many of those, reach out.
Thanks, Meg. We had another question here. Someone was interested in what supports are available in the Corner Brook area, either paid or volunteer, to assist the person's parents who are residents of one of the retirement facilities over there. And now Trudy may have in Trudy's information that she gave us, there might be something. And if not, we will look up something and I'll send it out to you. I'll send out what information that we have on that, okay? I don't think anybody has it at their fingertips. Do you or Meg?
No, I don't have it at my fingertips, but happy to dig it out.
Yeah.
And one thing I'd like to say, Mary, is that this has been, I know, sort of perhaps, or maybe not for you, a lot of information. But here's the reality. It's not all of the information that's available. And most importantly, this is an emotional, mental journey. It's physical, it's emotional, it's all of those things. And I think here at SeniorsNL, what we're hoping is that this is the beginning of the conversation on all things related to caregiving. We're hoping for many other opportunities to further this conversation in the form of presentations or in whatever format. But there are so many layers to this that we hope that this conversation continues to go on and that you give us feedback on what is really important to you so that we can add that to that conversation. Sorry.
Yeah. Someone in the chat box asked, would work from home be an option? And that's in relation to providing care for someone while you're still employed. And I would think that that would be, that would definitely be an option. I expect, especially now, since COVID, with so many people working from their homes anyway. And
I agree.
but I think the thing to really take into consideration is just how much you are capable of doing during a caregiving situation. You know?
Yeah.
The work is not going to go away, believe me. And the final question I had here was, I'm interested to know more about any of the options for family or friends to be paid as caregiver. I guess it's, you know, like what are the, how can someone be paid? You know what's, oh my.
I know what you're saying.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, because my
I
brain's
know there are paid.
in the same place as
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess what are the financial assessments? Like, what does that look like for people?
Yeah, so what I'm going to suggest is that so the Newfoundland benefit. So the 4 that I went through, right, are the caregiver paid options. And 2 of them are Service Canada. Well, 3 of them are Service Canada, I guess. Well, one is Revenue Canada, and that is the tax credits. So definitely reach out to us. We can, you know, see if we can dig a little deeper into it for you. 2 of them are Service Canada attached to employment. So if you're not working in or not able to receive unemployment, then probably that one's not an option for you. But if you are, and then one of them is through Newfoundland, and that's through the community supports program. So the first thing to do is to make sure that the person is able to financially and physically pass the assessment for home care. And if so, then that is an option. And then they will tell you exactly the details of what and how much.
Thanks, Meg. Does anyone have any other questions for Meg?
Noreen, I don't have a question, but I just got a, you know, again, I live in Labrador. We're far, far away from resource-based centers. We talk about the palliative care piece. We don't really have it. We talk about respite, and we have 1 bed, I think, at our local hospital. So as Meg said, with the aging population we have, I have a friend right now who's hoping to get a break to do a few days vacation. So there's a whole assessment program to get access to that 1 bed, right? So, you know, again, I keep thinking of many people who live outside St. John's and far and rural. We're probably a lot better off than a lot. You know, we got the social work department, we got the mental health, but lots of places don't have these resources. So I really think, and as Meg said, with the population that we have that's aging so fast, like we need to start getting out in those rural areas with resources for those people. I've heard many, many nightmare stories. I think of coastal Labrador. I think of southern Labrador. I think of our distance. Like if we got to do an assessment in Alzheimer's, assessment on somebody, we got to try to get that person on a plane first to get them out to get that done. Like,
Noreen,
there's so many drawbacks, right?
has anything improved, Noreen, like just for the assessment, for example? Like, is that something that could be done virtually?
Well, I just go back to my own brother-in-law who lived in Newfoundland. He lived in Pleasanton, passed away, and I happened to be on the island at the time that my sister accompanied him and went. And like it was a couple of days he had to go, and one of the assessments, like he was like 6, 7, 8 hours doing that assessment.
Okay, yeah.
And I was like, whoa, right? So you imagine a person who's going in this state of dementia, you get them on a plane first off, 5, 6 hour plane ride. Then you got to get out without family, get a hotel, get the person over probably 2 or 3. Like it's difficult.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And geriatricians, I mean, like you need those specialists.
Yeah.
And,
And I mean,
as a province, we're lacking.
Oh yeah.
in that.
And I mean, and the part about that is I don't know if things are getting any lightening up any, but in order to get any resource base, then you have, these assessments are critical. Like they're telling you, like, well, do you have a diagnosis? Well, no, right?
Then how do you medicate?
Well, there's a whole piece to that, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's very difficult.
Yeah. And Mary, I'm noticing that, Trudy, thank you for all of that information. And when we send out this, the recording, I think we should pull some of the stuff out of chat and add it if we can.
And we will send out the presentation itself.
Of
right?
course,
Of course.
absolutely.
That's fabulous. And everybody, thank you so much, Trudy. Sorry.
I just had a question for Meg. Where do you get your information on compassion fatigue burnout as it relates to caregiving, or just the resources?
Where did I get it? Or where can you
Yeah,
get it?
like you. No, well, where did you actually get it? There's many, many places.
Yeah, I don't have that resource there, but I can get back to you on that.
Yeah, you can just add it to the list.
Yep, absolutely.
I'm just interested.
I think
Yeah.
it was for sure more than one resource, but I'll take a look and see where I pulled that.
Okay. Yeah.
There is one last thing I want to mention here. I kind of hate bringing it up, but I'm going to. It is really important if you're choosing a caregiver for your loved one or your neighbor or friend. It's really important to have people there, to have caregivers that can be trusted. Okay? I mean, we've all heard about, allegations of abuse, and we do know it happens. It happens far more than we realize because most senior abuse is not reported. So be very careful when you're looking for someone to take care of your loved one, that it is someone who is completely trustworthy. Okay. Probably not a great note to end off on, but that's the way it's
Can I just one help question?
Yes, go ahead.
Just one question. I put on the chat, but you probably don't see it yet. Anyway, I just want to mention that right now, CIA only give caregiver credits to low-income person. But actually, the toll of caregiving, mentally or physically, affect everyone. So every caregiver should have it, no matter what level of income it is. And I'm wondering if SeniorsNL make that request to CIA.
That's a really great question. And thank you for the observation on that as well. I think it certainly can't hurt to ask the question as to why it's only for low income, and to have that conversation with any of our resources at the CRA. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I noticed also,
and with our MHAs and with those people who advocate
right.
on our behalf.
everybody, yes, absolutely. And when they announce the seniors advocate, I think this should also be on that plate as well. And so what we will do for sure is make sure that that is raised with the seniors advocate office now. So I don't have an answer on why spouses can't be paid family caregivers in Newfoundland. I do not know the answer to that. And yes, feel free to use some of the content of this presentation for family and friends.
Yeah. And why can't spouses be paid family caregivers?
Do not know the answer to that one.
Yeah.
that one, personally, that one irked me as I was caregiver for my spouse.
Yeah.
Certainly
So,
something, a couple of pieces that we can dig our teeth in on though.
yes, that's true. That's true. But most of all, what I will say from personal experience is that I used to always think of myself as a bit of a MacGyver, and I always liked that trait about myself. being a caregiver made me an amazing MacGyver, because you have on the fly got to figure out some stuff. And whatever you do, I'm going to end on this note, and this may not apply to everyone, but it certainly applied to all three of my experiences, is that when you're caring for someone who has a long-term illness and or let's say dementia, so I'm not talking about short-term situations so much, but when I went into it, when I said, yes, I'm going to do this, I went in guns a-blazing. There was like, I was creating charts and I was doing it all, and I was a crazy woman, and I was in the acute stage for a very long period of time, burned myself out, and nobody appreciated it. And I was like, what? And I learned that it's a long game. It can be a very long, and I didn't know until I was well into it that this, I had no idea, like with my mother, it's going to go on for my father for 14 years. And at some point I realized that I needed to breathe, and I had that opportunity, and that I needed to save my energy for the acute moments. I needed to figure out when is the right time to fly in, stop flying in every week. I learned that the most important time to be with your loved one when something goes medically wrong is discharge. There's no more important time than discharge, because discharge is the moment when you get to be the best advocate possible. At one point, and once your loved one is discharged from the hospital, if you do it right, there's less chance they're going to be go back in very quickly. But if you do it wrong, they're going to be in next week. My dad was in 1 week after he came out. But then I learned about discharge, and I learned that I'm going to ask all the right questions. I'm going to make sure he has all the appointments, because the moment you're discharged, you're out of the system. You may not, your name may still be in the system, but you're not getting back in. And so there was one time I actually made my father squat at a hospital in Ontario for 7 hours until I got the name, date, phone number, and location of a specialist appointment, smiling the whole time, but saying, no, we're not leaving until I have that on a piece of paper before we go. And my father was quite good natured, and they fed him while we waited, but we signed nothing until we left. Because if I didn't get that, we were never going to see that specialist again. And that specialist ended up being the person who took my father's driver's license away, thank God, at some point. And he would have kept on driving, and things would have just gotten so ugly, I can't even imagine. So you have the power to be able to, but you got to do it nice. You got to put a smile on your face. But there are times that are really super important. You will learn that. And whatever you do when you're not in an acute phase, breathe and enjoy them, because that's when you get to laugh and you have some good times, and you save your energy for the tough ones, because there'll be tough ones too. Anyways, that's it for me.
Great job.
Thank you, Meg. Great presentation.
Thanks.
I want to thank everybody for joining us today. It was absolutely wonderful to see everybody again. And just a few things before we leave. I think everybody responded to the question, do you need a certificate? And they will be sent out hopefully later today. Barb will be working on that as soon as she can. And we've also got an open invitation for everybody to be a friend of SeniorsNL. And link older adults who have questions or concerns about programs, service, and issues to SeniorsNL. We would give out business cards, and with your name on one side, and on the other side would have our contact information. You don't have to have all the information at your fingertips yourself, but if you're talking to someone who you think would benefit from our services, just pass them a card, say, here, call them. That would be fabulous. Now, coming up soon, we've got a two-part workshop that Kelly Heiss, Executive Director of SeniorsNL, and I will be doing on the next 2 Tuesdays. The what, why, who, when, and how of advanced care planning. Starting the conversation will be next Tuesday morning, and the following Tuesday we will do the what, why, who, when, and how of advanced care planning, drafting the plan itself. So I do hope that as many of you as possible will take that in and hear more about advanced care planning, which is really important because it can protect you if the time comes when your health is jeopardized and you are unable to speak for yourself. And again, call us anytime for any kind of information that you're looking for. And on that note, I thank you all again, especially Meg and Trudy and Barb, and we'll see you hopefully next Tuesday. Goodbye, everybody.